They sent him in because they needed a ghost. Not a soldier, not a politician, not a hero. Someone who could disappear behind enemy lines and smile while the wolves sharpened their teeth. Paul Manning didn't come from privilege. He didn't come from polished schools or family names stitched into courtrooms. He came from the streets, battered, bruised, and fluent in the language of survival long before anyone handed him a badge. In England, he learned how to read danger before it spoke. In Canada, they used it against him. At first, it was simple. Buy from crack dealers, slip into weed houses, blend in, get out. But the streets have a way of keeping what they swallow. And before long, Paul wasn't just visiting the underworld. He was living inside it. One cigarette, one handshake, one betrayal at a time. How deep can you go before you forget who you were? How many lies can you tell before the truth doesn't fit anymore? And when the people who sent you in start looking the other way, who's really the enemy? This isn't a story about glory. It's about survival. It's about a man who walked too far into hell with nothing but his instincts, and found out that sometimes the darkness doesn't let you walk back out. Paul Manning came from a place where the ground taught you to fall before you ever learned to run. Angton, just outside Manchester, wasn't the kind of town that handed out futures. It buried them young.
So, just a small town called Accrington, just outside of Manchester, north of England.
The streets were worn thin from decades of broken promises. Every alley held a lesson. Every fight carved a warning deep into the bones of the boys who stayed too long. Paul stood at those crossroads early, taking punches behind nightclub doors before most kids had even left home.
That's pretty rough. It's a poor town. A lot of opportunities to do the wrong thing. And I chose not to. Or I chose to a few times, and then I chose to join the army.
By 16, he had already seen what loyalty cost and what survival demanded. He moved through a town thick with desperation, watching friends vanish into courtrooms and funerals, while others clung to dead-end jobs like lifeboats taking on water.
I was working the doors by the time I was 16, as security, and then I just decided that there's only two paths. If I stay in that little town, I'm going to go to jail, like a lot of my friends did that I work with.
There were no shortcuts waiting for him. Only the slow certainty that staying would devour him piece by piece. He chose otherwise. The army didn't appear as salvation. It appeared as motion, a way to keep moving before the town claimed another name for its headstone.
So I joined the army at 18 and joined the military police.
Uniforms replaced leather jackets. Orders replaced instinct. But somewhere beneath the drills and discipline, the same restless current ran through him. The one that taught him not to flinch when chaos kicked down a door. Paul adapted quickly, stepping into covert operations with the same silent calculation he had once used to avoid street fights that didn't pay.
I went from the military police, I went into covert operations, worked on the covert operations team for the Special Investigation Branch, and then from there I joined the Metropolitan Police. I did some undercover work there, but mostly uniform. I got promoted pretty quickly to sergeant.
Each mission blurred a little more into instinct, carving out a version of himself that could listen harder, wait longer, strike cleaner. Yet England, for all its histories and wars, felt small against the pull building inside him. When the chance came to cross the ocean, he took it with the same silent certainty he had carried all his life.
I looked at a few police services in Canada, much better standard of living compared to the UK. A lot cheaper at the time, now not so much. And it just seemed like a reasonable move.
Canada offered new streets to learn, new enemies to understand, and a fresh battleground where old instincts could thrive. Paul didn't arrive looking for peace or redemption. He arrived carrying a quiet readiness for whatever lay beneath the surface. the kind that can't be taught in classrooms or earned through badges.
And then we found ourselves in a position where the police services that I'd chosen weren't really for me. We weren't a good fit. Toronto were particularly very professional service, but there was something said during the interview that made me go, you know what, we're going to have problems in the future. It's not worth it. So the wife had just got on with Sussex Constabulary down in the south of England, and there was a decision made that we'd stay in the UK.
In the distance, the shadows of another war waited, and Paul Manning was already walking toward them. Hey brothers, tired of YouTube's BS and censorship? It's time to break free. That's why I've shifted gears to Patreon, where I can bring you the raw, uncensored content you crave. Join my Patreon crew and get an insane package deal. Exclusive early access to all videos, days before YouTube, 100% ad-free viewing experience. Uncensored, no-holds-barred community discussions, double the content. 2 killer videos every single week. VIP access, direct interaction with yours truly, inside scoop, exclusive biker world updates you won't find anywhere else. Ready to join the elite? Hit that Patreon link now. Your support doesn't just keep us rolling, it fuels a revolution of uncensored, unrestricted content. Join now and unlock a world of exclusive benefits. Hamilton didn't greet Paul Manning with open arms. It cracked its knuckles and sized him up from across the street. The badge wasn't new, but the weight of it felt different in Canada.
And then a police service called Hamilton reached out and said, listen, we've got a project. You've worked undercover before, police officer. We won't mind you coming in and seeing if you can shut down a couple of problem premises. And that's where it all started.
Hamilton hired him not for ceremony, but for the cracks he could slip through. They didn't need a patrolman. They needed a ghost who could breathe the same air as criminals without coughing up fear. The mission started simple enough. 2 problem hotspots, nothing more. A crack house rotting from the inside, and a weed lounge clinging to its last breath of legality. No syndicates, no guns, no heavy hitters waiting in the dark. At least, that's what they told him.
There were a couple of problem premises. There was a crack house called the Sandbar, which was a real shithole. It was disgusting. And then there was another facility called Up in Smoke, and it was an establishment where people went in and smoked weed, which at the time was frowned upon, and now it's completely illegal. And we looking back, we just wasted our time for God knows how many years trying to deal with that.
Paul slipped into the underbelly the way rain slips into cracks. No sirens, no backup. Just a new accent, a burner phone, and the cold understanding that a single wrong word could leave him face down in a ditch. Inside the sandbar, the air was so thick with smoke and sweat that even time seemed to move slower. Men who had nothing left to sell hawked scraps of stolen goods for crumbs of crack. The walls, yellowed and peeling, seemed to watch every deal without judgment. He didn't wait for introductions. He made buys quick, unannounced, handshakes dripping with tension. 40 people, 300 offenses, all within weeks.
We got in within days. And then it went to, because we did so well, we started hitting the bangers and the local dealers and all crack purchases. And we never got refused, and it was all cold calls. It was me picking up the phone, calling somebody and saying, listen, can you sort me out? And they'd come out, they'd meet me, and we'd buy off them. So we probably got, in the first 2 weeks, we probably got maybe 40 people on 300 offences.
The streets whispered about the Englishman who never asked too many questions, never got greedy, and never flinched. Each call felt like a match struck in a room soaked with gasoline. But instead of blowing up, Paul slipped deeper. Not because he was lucky, but because he understood something they didn't. Predators look for hesitation, and Paul left them none.
So the test purchase portion of it, I was surprised how easy it was, and I've got to be honest, probably played along on the accent. I don't sound Canadian in the slightest, for instance.
No.
So it worked out pretty well. They weren't by bus though, so we had to start identifying these people that we were buying off. Because if you buy a bus, you've got to disclose that I'm an undercover police officer, and that would have ended everything.
The cases stacked up faster than the paperwork could follow. Every name scribbled into his hidden notes was another thread in a web only he could see forming.
So when we got to a stage where we were making so many purchases that we were falling behind on the paperwork, and there was a team just for paperwork.
But success breeds hunger, and hunger calls louder than fear. Did Paul know even then that he was already crossing a line no one comes back from? Did he realize the small-time busts were never the real mission? Or was he, like so many before him, already too far inside to tell the difference? The first doors swung open easily. It would be the next ones that refused to let him walk away. The call for something bigger came without warning. A casual suggestion tossed across a briefing table. See if you can get close to the Mafia down on James Street North. No backup plans, no deep files, just a stack of faded photos and whispers about a problem community. Portuguese and Italian bloodlines stretching back decades.
There was a suggestion made that I go and infiltrate this particular community, the Mafia down on an area called James Street North, which is a Portuguese-Italian community, large Portuguese-Italian community. And I went, sure, why not?
How do you prepare for men raised in silence and sharpened by betrayal? How do you walk into a bar packed with loyalty thicker than blood and not drown before you speak? And when the badge tucked inside your pocket can't save you, what do you hold on to then?
I've seen Donnie Brasco and I've watched Goodfellas, but you can't prepare yourself for the reality of it. I mean, you've been around, you know. You see portrayals of certain people on TV, and then when you actually get to the reality of it, it's completely different. There are some similarities, but I've got to be honest. It was mostly the rules they follow.
Paul didn't have the luxury of strategy. He had a handful of faces memorized, a cigarette burned low between his fingers, and the stubborn refusal to show fear when the air around him crackled with it. Bar after bar blurred into a parade of stone faces and careful nods, until a place called Pascar broke the rhythm.
With this, I did demand pictures and some intelligence reports, simply the fact that I started to get suspicious now that perhaps they didn't have the ability for this kind of operation. So what I did was I demanded some intelligence reports and photographs and names and the like, and then I spent maybe 12 hours trawling through these pictures, just picture by picture by picture, not looking at the faces or the hair or the hairline, but just the eyes. And then I went out and I went from bar to bar to bar, and I ended up in a place called Pescaro's.
An Italian dive where coffee was bitter, and the eyes behind the counter were sharper than the knives in the kitchen. It wasn't the coffee that mattered. It was the man who served it. Paul caught the flicker in his glance, recognition hidden behind casual questions. Lou, he called himself.
And I go in and I order a coffee, and straight away the guy that comes and serves the coffee, I recognize him. Straight away. From the eyes, just he stood out. We chatted, I played a bit.
Later, Paul would learn his real name. James Lewis Malone, a Hells Angels prospect with a habit of mixing cocaine, alcohol, and violence into a cocktail few could stomach.
His name was James Lewis Malone, and he was a prospect with the Hells Angels at the time. He got patched I want to say about 3 months later, he got his full patch. And he was a nightmare.
Trust didn't bloom. It cracked open under pressure. An apartment above the bar became Paul's outpost, a place to listen, to drink, to bleed information from the cracks between deals and debts. The deeper he sank, the more the worlds blurred. Mobsters and bikers shared tables and secrets. Counselors shook hands with thieves. The line between law and lawless smeared until even Paul wondered for a moment which side he stood on.
When you're around this guy, Lou, you said another cop told him that you were an undercover agent?
Way down, long into the operation.
The badge tucked in his memory felt lighter every day. Not gone, just buried under layers of cigarette smoke, whispered deals, and nights where survival depended on how well he could lie with his eyes. And somewhere deep inside that crooked skyline, the real game was only just beginning. Because in Hamilton's underworld, it was never about if you slipped. It was about who would be waiting to catch you when you did, and whether they'd use a hand or a knife. There are no manuals for how to survive in the middle of two empires. No training courses for nights where bikers and mobsters drink under the same roof, passing deals across splintered tables while knives sit ready beneath jackets. Paul learned by breathing it. Pascar became a second skin, a place where loyalty was tested with whiskey shots and sideways glances. Above the bar in a cramped apartment that smelled of mildew and cigarette ash, he mapped every handshake, every whispered deal, every glance that lingered too long. Trust didn't come through conversation. It came through chaos. Fistfights erupted over insults nobody remembered the next day. Deals twisted and snapped under the weight of greed. And Paul, dancing on the knife edge, never flinched. He fought when they fought. He drank when they drank. He laughed too loudly and cursed too often, weaving himself so deep into their world that suspicion became a background noise, never gone, just dulled by the rhythm of surviving one more night.
And there's certain techniques that we use when we're undercover not to drink, but make it look like we're drinking. And he didn't give me that opportunity. And I was wasted. I was pretty drunk. So by the end of the night, I'm on a table, dancing my shirt off with Hell's Angels, and it just fit. It all came together in that one evening. Everybody knew who I was. I told everyone I was called English, changed to the Englishman. But it just completely fit. So we found ourselves in a position where we were in the thick of things. I lived there. I traded there, as in drugs, smoke, stolen goods, anything I could get my hands on. I'd pretend that I'd stole it, or we found it some other way. And we found ourselves in a position where we were into everybody, and I mean everybody. And it opened up a number of doors, because everyone wants to do business with you if you're making money.
But no amount of camouflage could stop what was coming. In undercover work, cash is king, but cigarettes, it turned out, were currency no one questioned. The closer Paul worked with the CBSA, the more creative the operation became. They started filtering seized cigarettes his way. Cartons confiscated at the border, just sitting in storage, suddenly turned into pure fuel for the mission. In Hamilton's underground economy, cigarettes could get you anything.
We made a contact down at CBSA, so on the border, and we're quite close to the border in Hamilton. We're like 20 minutes away from Niagara Falls. And they started supplying us with cigarettes that have been seized. And cigarettes are a very, very tradable commodity.
Paul bought crack with them. He bought stolen generators. He covered bar tabs and debts. He traded them for trust, for silence, and for secrets that would never land on record. He didn't need a project fund. The cigarettes covered it all. And because it wasn't actual money coming from the department's books, the operation ran clean, at least from the inside.
I put us in a position where we were spending no money on this project, so they didn't have to put a project fund together to go and say, listen, we need this much money, we need this much money. I paid for everything with cigarettes. I'd also have times where I had no money and I was begging for money and trying to borrow, and then I had times where people owed me a hell of a lot of money.
No police budget to justify. No accountant red flags. But the truth was, the deeper Paul went, the more real it became. He was owed tens of thousands of dollars by dealers who had no idea they were feeding evidence straight to the cops. By the end, The debt floating on the street totaled around $60,000, all tied to one man with an English accent and a pack of smokes.
So
Yeah.
we were probably, when the operation finished, throughout the city, we were probably owed about $60,000. That's how many moves we were making.
The buys weren't theatrical. They didn't tackle people on the street. Paul used cold calls, quiet approaches, whispered, "Can you sort me out?" followed by clean exits. No arrests on the spot, just documentation, surveillance, pattern building.
So we did test purchases. We didn't bust them. So there's no.
Oh no, the cold calls, right?
Yeah. So the cold calls are effectively buy busted test purchases. So usually, I come up to you in the street. I go, "Can you sort me out?" You either tell me to fuck off, or you give me a 40 piece, and I take my crack and I skip off.
They'd pull people later, after the connections were traced, and no one suspected the guy who smiled, paid, and vanished.
With this, what we did was we followed people off because we didn't want to burn the fact this was a UC operation, because we weren't getting refused. So why put it on the street that there's this UC going around arresting everybody with an English accent? So we put it out there that we'd follow these people off, we'd create a case file, and then we'd arrest them at a later date. And it worked pretty well.
But the more Paul blended in, the harder it became to know where the job ended and the act began. He wasn't just tolerated, he was accepted. He drank with bikers in illegal booze cans. He poured brandy for 70-year-old mobsters who never questioned why he was there.
I went to the clubhouse a couple of times. I went to their illegal booze cans as well a couple of times. Nice facilities. They spend some money on these places. The HA was running them. The mafia was running them all the time. Then I started to get introduced to the older guys, and I found myself in a position where you've got guys that were 70 years old that have been mobsters. The Paley family, for instance, they've been mobsters. They've been on the street 53 years working, never been arrested.
At times, he walked into their homes, turned on the TV, and sat in silence beside men who hadn't been arrested once in 50 years. Was this infiltration or indoctrination? Could anyone live that deep inside and not start to bend under the weight of it? And when the final move came, would anyone be there to pull him out? The streets owed him money, but what they really owed him was something harder to collect, a way back out. He didn't know it yet, but CD Martini's would be the place where the line between performance and survival would finally snap. CD Martini's was the kind of place where smiles were rare and names were rarely spoken twice. Paul had been there before, just another night in a mob bar, trying not to attract attention, while quietly soaking in every word, every nod, every exchange that might lead to a crack in someone's story. But that night the temperature shifted. Two men walked in, the Reardon brothers. Heavy-handed, dead-eyed, and unpredictable. Paul had bought off one of them a dozen times at least. When Paul saw them, something in his chest tightened. Not fear exactly, more like instinct catching up to reality. He hadn't expected them there. They hadn't expected him either. He couldn't afford to be recognized, not as someone who bought crack, not in front of the wrong ears. The Hells Angels sold drugs, but they didn't respect users.
And then all of a sudden he shows up at CD Martini's and he's looking at me across the bar, and he's with his brother. And I think, I don't know what's going on, but I don't want these guys telling people in there that I buy crack off them, because the last thing I want the mob thinking is that I use crack. Same with the Hells Angels. They don't appreciate it. It's not something they associate with. They'll sell it, but they don't want you using it because you're easy to turn.
So Paul slipped outside for a cigarette, unsure whether to leave altogether or wait out the tension. The air was cold, but the back of his neck burned. Every bone told him to walk, but his legs wouldn't move. That's when the door behind him creaked open. He turned to see both Reardon brothers stepping into the alley. No words, just eyes. Vacant, unreadable, locked in on every breath. One of them reached into his jacket. The other shifted sideways, cutting off his escape to the street. Could he run? Would backup arrive if he called out?
And then they come out through the other door and they come onto the patio area. And one of them says, "Hey, cop." And I went, "What?" And then, boom, somebody hit me from behind. I can take a punch, but that guy rocked my world, the one that hit me from behind. I turned expecting Tyson or Holyfield or some other monster there, and it was just some skinny little kid. He just caught me right.
What saved him wasn't muscle. It was training.
And I managed to get to the apartment. And once in the apartment, I phoned through to the handler. I said, "Listen, did you hear that?" He's like, "No, your wire's down." Okay, great.
Oh, great.
It was always down. I phoned through to the handler. I told him very calmly. He said, "Okay, stay there. What we'll do is we'll get a cruiser to come outside. The cruiser can sit there. We'll put on come on, Paul. Brain's slow. We'll put it on a disturbance call. Tell them there's a disturbance so they don't know what's going on. And then you come out, get a UC call, and then we'll debrief." Okay, fine. So I come out, and I'm all cut up and bruised by now. But I come out, he phones back, says, "The cruiser's outside. Come out, get in your car and go." So I'm like, "All right, fantastic."
Later, no report would mention the Reardon brothers. No internal memo would ask why 4 known hitters walked into a bar where an undercover was sitting alone. And Paul, bruised, breathless, and burning with questions, was left with the one truth no badge could erase. He was in this alone.
So I come out of the door, no cruiser. I come down the road, I turn left into the alleyway where the car is, and they're there waiting for me again, same guys. So then we fired again for about another 11 minutes. And then it got to a stage where I thought, these guys are going to kill me. They're really going to kill me. They're not giving up. They've got knives out now. And I think I broke a bottle. I grabbed a bottle off the table and I broke that. I said, "Right, step in, let's go." And I turned from being defensive and being an undercover police officer to somebody who needed to survive and get the fuck out of there. And I think when my attitude changed and the calmness and the fact that I thought, "Yeah, step in, I'm going to stab you." When I got to that stage, that's when they took off. But I'm there fighting with them, and a member of the cover team drives past, looks directly at me, and just keeps on driving.
He didn't talk about the attempt right away. There was no report to Phil, no call from command asking if he was okay. CD martinis came and went in silence, like a bad dream no one wanted to believe was real. The Reardon brothers vanished into the city's cracks, and the operation kept moving like nothing had happened. But something had shifted. Paul had survived dealers, gangsters, mafia elders, Hell's Angels, and months of walking a tightrope with no net. What he hadn't prepared for was the quiet realization that when it all came crashing down, no one from the force showed up. Not during the hit, not after.
So I went back to the debrief, and I think I was already struggling by then. I didn't trust Hamilton police. I thought, now I was thinking we'd been sold out. Cover team, because of what happened. And in hindsight, that officer, I mean, it's come up a couple of times, that officer may well have been drunk, because they're all drinking on duty, it turns out. And that's probably why he didn't get out of the car, because you get out of the car when you're drunk and shoot somebody, and there's an investigation, and you go to jail yourself for murder.
He started seeing things differently. He remembered the cigarettes, how he'd built an entire operation off seized contraband, how he'd bankrolled a war from the shadows and ended up being told the unit might have to pay tax on the money he made. He remembered begging for operational funds, being told there wasn't enough, then turning street debt into leverage. Over $60,000 was owed by the time it ended. But the books didn't show that. They just showed a name the system wanted to move past.
So the Hells Angels sent these guys. So when I spoke to Lou Malone, maybe 2013, October 2013, way after this undercover operation had finished, and he's the one that told me that I was sold out by a police inspector. And he confirmed that these guys were sent specifically to scare me off. Only these guys don't scare people off, they kill people. I mean, the mafia use the Hells Angels. The Hells Angels use the gangbangers, and the gangbangers are disposable as far as everyone's concerned, which is they're the young kids that are come from poor houses and have no other option than to get involved in drugs. So they are.
Was that what his life was worth? A few good quotes and a box of files? Did anyone truly understand what it meant to become someone else, day after day, until even your own reflection stopped feeling familiar? And when the justice system collected its wins, who paid the emotional debt? The operation closed with over 3,000 charges and more than 200 people implicated. It should have been a triumph.
The entire operation was a really good play. It was a really, really good play, but it wasn't because of the assistance of Hamilton Police. We just got lucky with the party at the beginning. We got lucky with a few instances where I probably could have died, that I didn't die, and we got lucky with the acceptance they had for me.
Instead, it felt like walking off a battlefield, only to find the flag half raised and the medics gone. Paul didn't disappear. He didn't retire into silence. He rebuilt. These days, he works with law enforcement across borders, training, speaking, and pulling back the curtain on what it really means to go undercover. He teaches agencies how to plan better, how to support their officers, and most importantly, how to bring them back from the edge without pretending it didn't cost something. He's not bitter. He's precise. When he speaks for those who can't, for the ones still buried in cover names, still waiting for someone to ask if they're okay. He's turned his scars into curriculum, his story into armor. There's no ceremony for undercover work, no closure, no parades. Just the memories, the burned scars that don't show, and the questions that never really stop asking. He didn't get justice, but he walked out alive. And for a UC who went that deep, that's rare enough to count for something.